The year is 3021. There are no new ideas. There hasn't been a Marvel film in 2 generations, but even that's not enough to save the integrity of a dying media industry. The last journalist at Entertainment Weekly hits publish on their first article in 6 months. The CW network announces Vampire Diaries reboot in development. Here are the tapes. Hey Ingrid, how are you?
Hi Flo, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm okay. I have a bit of ginger juice in my eye and I spilled a bit of
Ginger
water.
juice in your eye.
Yeah, I was unpacking some groceries and I like dropped a bit of ginger and like exposed the flesh and so I'm like
And it landed in your eye?
I like
Oh,
rubbed it in my
okay.
eye later and was not very diligent about the cleanup on that one. So that's on
Okay.
me, but I feel good. I think it's brought some good energy to
Yeah,
this.
ginger must be good for something. So I
Yeah.
think we're good.
Yeah. Well, at least it's not garlic. Ha 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 ha.
Ha ha ha
Okay.
ha. Okay.
Okay, so why the Vampire Diaries? Why are we doing the Vampire Diaries? Why are we here? Why do we care? You go first.
Okay. That's a really good question. I think for me, it's just because I'm very nostalgic uh, of all that media that I consumed back when I was, you know, uh, young teenager with stars in my eyes and with ideals and hopes and dreams. And vampire media, specifically like fantasy media from that time, was very interesting with the advent of Twilight and with the Vampire Diaries. It just hit a very specific um, niche, I guess, that I was super interested in. So I just love to revisit that, I guess. What about you? Why the Vampire Diaries for you?
I really like blood and unnecessary drama, so I think it hits a lot of notes for me. But yeah, probably the same as you, like that level of nostalgia. But yeah, I like how messy it is a lot of the time. I mean, there's good messy and there's bad messy, obviously. But
Hmm.
I definitely appreciate the constant twisty nature, the dark and twisties of it all.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't say that the vampire lore is my 100% favorite and how I would do it every time, as it is in the show. But I do appreciate the like subtle nods to the classic stuff. And I also really have always enjoyed the like, you have to be invited inside is just really funny. Like the awkwardness, I think it's just in the first episode in particular, just like the knowledge that he can't get inside until she invites him and like the awkwardness around all that. It's the kind of like secondhand embarrassment with a supernatural twist that I enjoy. And I like the like clearly defined rules of like accessing people's homes and that kind of thing. Alleviates a little social anxiety, I would say personally. So I think that's pretty funny.
That's interesting. I remember there was another moment where someone was really mad that they'd recently been turned into a vampire because they had rented an apartment, so they couldn't get into their own apartment because they technically weren't the owners, and that probably was super
That's
inconvenient for
funny.
them. So yeah,
I feel like that
I
wasn't
it's
really fully explored even because like eventually some people become vampires and then can get into their like college dorms and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure. So like how does that work? But I think it's funny and a bit sad. I don't feel bad for that particular character, but it is a bit sad.
Yeah, I think they should have explored it. I think it was just too much of an inconvenience for them to actually lean into, but it would have been cool for them to explore that a little bit more. And it's interesting the facets of vampire lore that they decided to go with and the parts that they decided to abandon. So the thing about entering someone's house, needing their permission is one thing, but like I don't know, garlic isn't much of an issue. They can't go out in the sun, but then they invent like a really like simple way to circumvent that. It doesn't really become a problem for most of the characters. So there's no like seedy underbelly of Mystic Falls where there's a group of people who only walk around at night because they're vampires and a lot of things don't happen at night, which usually associate with vampire media. And I thought that would have been it would have been cool for them to include, I guess. But I would have liked for them to
Mm,
have leaned a little bit more with traditional vampire tropes. I think that would have been interesting, and I think that's like my main proposal for this project is like go all in on vampire stuff like garlic, silver, crucifixes, entering people's homes, having to count rice if you throw it at them, like
yes.
all of that shit is really cool.
Yeah. I think the absence of the real nightlife is a bit disappointing. I think certain I think like some vampire media does that really, really well, like incorporates that whole idea. I think True Blood leans on that so hard, like this idea that you there's just nothing happening during the day. If you're hanging out with vampires, you like basically there's nothing for you during the day. If you're like obsessed with vampires, there's people who sleep all day because they want to be with the vampires at night. Just that like divide in the nightlife and the like well developed sense of vampire community and lore and that sort of thing is much more dominant. But I think while we incorporate that more like ancient, you know, tropes, I suppose, I would still like to keep the overall 2009 atmosphere. I think, like, for it being nostalgic for us, like, it's important to preserve that in a way. So, like, the blackberries and the, like, big classic music moments and all that kind of thing. Like, I just think it's a cool nod to the era. So, like, setting it in modern times now in the year 3000 and whatever would just not totally work for me, I don't think.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy the music, the original soundtrack, because back then it was such a back when I first watched it, it was a really big part of my own musical taste. But now it's just like super dated pop punk. But I kind of love that. So when I listen to it, I can kind of go back into that particular era of
Yeah.
like of 2009 and everything that went down there. So I would have loved to
Mm,
like keep the Paramore and the Amberlin and all of
yeah.
those bands and songs that they kept
Mm,
for the original series.
mhm. Yeah, I think they kind of I don't wanna say aged out of, but I guess that's true, like, they kind of aged out of that music, like, at a certain point, they stopped having so much of those, uh, like, those moments. I think, like, can't think of a single Paramore song in the later seasons or that kind of thing. Like, I think it was,
Hmm.
a little more. I would say there is probably a genre of music that is like 2010s CW TV shows for teenage girls, like, and I think they definitely ended up there, but I don't know that they 100% started there. So, yeah, I think it would be cool to kind of play around with both of those ideas, right? Like the music that is more you might consider more typical of some of the other shows of that era versus the kind of early seasons, like punk, rock, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Could be cool.
Yeah.
Happy with that. I think getting the music down and getting an idea of that of the overall vibe is like, I mean, obviously there's still story, but like the vibe is important. It's important.
The vibes are the most important part. Yeah.
Okay, so the vibe has been checked.
Mhm.
Another thing that I really want to keep, and I feel like this is a bit of a no-brainer because it's like the story, but I love the kill your double stuff with Elena and Catherine, and then even the doppelgangers. Like, I get the sense that some people felt it was kind of overplayed eventually, but I do really enjoy the like kill your double. Like this person is a mirror of you, but
Hmm.
they're not you, and it's like frightening, but also like kind of thrilling and a bit scary and that sort of thing. So, what do you think about that? How did you receive those kinds of plot lines?
I liked it too. I liked the juxtaposition of Elena and Catherine with Stefan and Damon and how they're all mirrors of each other and how they interact with the world, interact with being a vampire, interact with all the supernatural events around them, totally mirror each other. So I think that's kind of a core theme that they did kind of lean a little bit too heavy into that eventually, but in the beginning, I think that was very interesting to explore that sort of rivalry, that tension between like these very similar people, but with kind of opposing ideologies, opposing perspectives that clash inevitably. So I definitely think that that should be maintained.
Yeah, I think it's the core points of friction is different ideologies around the
Hmm.
supernatural world. So Cool. Keeping that one. Okay. Unless you have anything else super great that you would like to mention about, preserving or keeping in place, uh, I think I personally have a list of things that I would like to get rid of, and I imagine you do as well. So, I can start us off with like a quick no-brainer, I
Mm-hmm.
assume. There's in the first episode like a really weird transphobic comment from Bonnie, which is super out of
Yeah.
character and
Uh-huh.
unnecessary. And I think she's even like in the moment self-aware enough to say like, "Are we even still allowed to say that?" Um, and I would just say like those kinds of little digs, they come off very strange. They come off a little bit mean girl. They're like not super appropriate. It's probably not something that we need to keep from that particular era. Like both the comments like transphobic in nature and also the absence of trans people in the narrative and that sort of thing. So like that's a big one
Mm-hmm.
for me, but I imagine that it's not going to be particularly contentious. What do
Yeah,
you
we
think?
could just completely abandon that altogether. Some parts of the script were very, um, I don't want to say like it was very 2000s because even at that time it was a pretty shitty thing to say, but it kind of betrays the fact that we didn't really have these like discussions so openly about media and how people are represented in media, especially people from like marginalized groups and the LGBT community and people of color and all that. So um, one way that that kind of manifests itself on the show is that the cast is predominantly white and the main cast is entirely straight. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that should definitely uh, be changed.
I think
Like,
I think once we've established like I'm not going to say quota, but that is a little bit what I mean because I personally can't really get into something that's unrealistically just totally ignores whole groups of society. It just doesn't work for me. So I think, yeah, definitely bringing certain communities more to the fore in the narrative. And I think what's particularly a problem is that some communities are touched upon or used, I would say, invoked allegorically
mhm.
by certain issues like the kind of like addiction parallels between like vampires feeding and then Vicky is an addict and that sort of thing. So I think and then also like the only gay character in the early seasons tries to perform vampire conversion therapy on his daughter, for
Mhm,
example.
mhm.
These kinds of like nods at communities, like it just feels a little bit like coy and also ill considered. And I just think that they come across very differently when you actually present these communities like in their own voices and not as narrative devices. And there's a way to do that and still drive the story forward. It doesn't have to be a lecture; it's still a narrative, but there's a way to do that that's not,
Yeah.
you know, well, how sad that Vicky died because she was an addict and she couldn't handle being a vampire, and now everybody can have this ensuing drama about how terrible it was that she was an addict and selfish and trash and whatever. Like it's just so unsympathetic to her as a human being, of the same caliber as every other character. So I think, in general, responding more empathetically and being more thoughtful in presenting communities is
Yeah,
a good
definitely. A
idea.
little bit more about the allegory with addiction is that like Stefan is kind of used to represent the same thing, but he doesn't suffer the same fate as Vicky because Vicky
Mm-hmm.
is constructed as an addict outside of vampirism, and so that's like what inevitably leads to her downfall. Whereas they tried to use the same metaphor with Stefan, um, but it's just blood that's human blood that he's addicted to, and he tries so hard to fight it, and that's seen as like as an example of his morality, so to speak. But because Vicky isn't able to because she's
Mm-hmm.
already an addict, that's like a condemnation of her character, and she's punished for that. So yeah, that whole metaphor could have been
Mm-hmm.
handled so much better. You're totally right.
Vicky is also the only person shown to get high from vampire blood, which is an example
Hmm.
of inconsistent world building, first and foremost, but also just totally bizarre. Like, there's that point where she's in the house with Damon and she's like begging for another hit of blood, and it just doesn't really make sense in any way. And I found it quite frustrating when I was kind of looking back on it. I did that is definitely something that I didn't pick up on as an issue in my first watches at 14 years old. But just watching it back,
Hmm.
it's like pretty disappointing and like a little bit ugly. And I would say I'm not 100% opposed to exploring the supernatural alongside illness and disability and just various ways in which people can be marginalized. But I think that there's a way to do it, like time and a place. And it's just, yeah, I think either having Vicky not die or just deconstructing this whole idea that she deserved to in some way, I think is more helpful. And also, I think that Caroline, I mean, I'm sure we'll get more into this eventually, but I think that Caroline should maybe have some more struggles, rather than just, well, she's a control freak, so she's fine to be a vampire and she's going to actually do this totally fine. I think that that comes across as, like, when you play that against what happened to Vicky, it's just
Hmm.
really awful. So it would just be better to kind of deconstruct that a little.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Speaking a bit more about like how they try to talk about real like life conditions and issues as supernatural metaphors on the show. One thing that I would like to tweak, if not abandon outright, is the idea of the humanity switch, which I don't really dig because this idea that you can turn off your emotions and your empathy, and that usually makes you murderous and a horrible person and monstrous, kind of has some awful implications when you realize that there are actual people who maybe don't experience empathy the same way that most people do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are any more dangerous than others.
Mm.
So I like the idea of the humanity switch kind of being metaphorical, where if you become immortal, if you become a vampire, then you sort of have like these philosophical reflections about what it means, like to what where your priorities lie, so to speak. Like how do you view other people who are more vulnerable than you when you're so much more powerful, when you're going to live forever? And I think that could be an interesting way to explore the concept of humanity and not necessarily like, oh, no emotions, no empathy, like, and that equals murderous rampage. I think that that's something that we could change as well. What do you think?
Yeah, it's unfortunate and irritating, and also doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really have a lot of internal logic. Like, I'm still not sure if it's that they switch off all of their emotions or just empathy, because they are still absolutely able to enjoy themselves while they switch it off. Like, they still do things for their own pleasure. So, like, just the whole situation around it is deeply confusing and needs clarification. And I agree that I would not be happy with it. I would not personally be happy with it just being clarified to be like, oh yeah, they turn off their empathy and then they become evil. It just doesn't make sense. It's not, um, because there are absolutely people who have low empathy or no empathy and exist alongside us in society and don't do terrible things and just live their lives, grow old, either have a family, don't have a family, pass away. Like, this is the cycle of life. They've always been around. It doesn't really make sense to suddenly decide that it's this indicator of immorality in supernatural creatures. It's just a little bit bizarre. So, what I would suggest is that potentially the humanity switch could represent, um, the capacity, the way in which a vampire is actually engaging in the humanity of people around them, whether that's humans or other people. Like, I would say that there are quite easy ways for, like, if you suddenly became super powerful and could do whatever you wanted, it could make anyone do anything you wanted. It would be quite easy to slip away from considering yourself, a citizen of the world,
Mm-hmm.
considered like living in a society, as some might say. Like, it would be quite easy to become, I guess, disenfranchised, and that violence and feeding your own appetite would be a part of that. I don't think that it should be like a switch just on or off. I think that it's just a question, right, for people who have this experience in particular. And I would say, um, yeah, like, I'm happy to kind of workshop it over time, but yeah, I'm not happy with how it is currently, and I would like to explore some alternatives. And another thing that I would probably like to change, and I think this is also going to be a bit of a no-brainer. The age gap is not
Mm-hmm.
something that I enjoy very much. I think that as we talk about adolescence and nostalgia for that era, I would stay still. It may be better to just age the like most of the cast up into college, like not even freshman year, but like, what's the second year of college in the US? That one,
You're
the year two.
sophomore. I think that's the word. Is that no? Is that only for high school?
Sophomore? Yeah, it messes me up because, like, is it sophomore or junior?
Sophomore, second year. Sophomore, second year.
Okay.
Okay.
It fucks me up that they have freshman and junior because I feel like that should be the same thing, but okay. Like, okay, guys.
It fucks me up that they have like names for
Yeah,
things. Just say year one, year two, year
yeah,
three. Like what the fuck?
exactly.
But okay.
We
Well, Americans.
yeah. So what do they so they say year 1, year 2, year 3 in Brazil?
Yeah,
Well, I
like
mean, I assume they say
we
it in
don't really have
Portuguese.
specific names. We say in
Yeah,
Portuguese, but we don't have specific names.
yeah,
Do we have? No, we don't. Like, that's so weird.
yeah. Because here, year
But
1, year 2, year 3, that's all like primary school, like when you're like a little kid, and then like you go all the way to year 12 when you're like 18, and then usually in uni you would say like first year, second year, third year, and then like your degree's name,
mhm.
like if you're talking about it. So yeah, but it is weird that they have like special
Yeah,
names
like
for it.
yeah,
Some weird like Hogwarts shit. Everything needs a special name.
some weird Hogwarts.
Okay, yeah. So we age them up to sophomore in college, not high school. How do you feel about that?
I really like that idea. Not just because it kind of eliminates the more unsavory side of the age gap thing that vampire media of the time really fell prey to really often because I guess critiques of this aspect were so common, but discussions have been had since then. So we kind of agree that a person that's more than 100 years old going to high school to interact with high school students who are all minors probably isn't the best thing. It probably isn't a healthy thing to do, like, even from their perspective. Like, if you're immortal, why are you going back to high school, dude? It doesn't make sense. Go to college, learn something new,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yep.
what are you going to major in? It'd be cool to like find your interest and major in that. And it
Mm.
also kind of opens up the possibility of us deciding what each character's major would be, which I think is more fun than just them just taking a science class in high school or whatever. So
Yeah.
I really like that idea.
Yeah. So what major do you think Stefan would have?
Stefan, I think that, and this probably is just because I think that Mystic Falls needs a therapist or someone with a background in psychology. I think it'd be really cool if he um, went through kind of that aspect of like psychology because I like the idea of him wanting to take care of people, but he can't really do that from a medical perspective because that would mean
Mm.
contact with blood and that would probably not work for him as a vampire. But him taking care of people in that other aspect, I think, would be interesting. So a psych major for Stefan because Mystic Falls needs someone of that background. Absolutely.
Yes. And imagine how much more annoying he'll be in arguments with Damon. Like like with psych major language. Like
Because he will have the science to back it up.
yeah.
He will have absolutely. That'd be great.
I yeah, I think that would be entertaining. I don't know that we want Damon to have a major because I think that would there needs to be like a really good reason for him to be there. Like I cannot think of one for him to like actually be attending. Like I can't really imagine him sitting in class and whatnot. Whereas like Stefan's concept of um like it would be cool if he just kind of grew into this understanding that he's been angsting over not being able to be a doctor for so long and now psychology is like what makes sense for him. um
Hmm.
what do you think about Elena? Because I think, you know, she studies medicine originally, but kind of feel like, I don't know, I kind of feel like in the show she originally wanted to be a writer, right? Like
Yeah,
she
yeah.
did like she had the whole journal thing, right? Remember when there was a diary in this shit? So
In the show called The
so
Vampire
maybe
Diaries, yeah.
yeah, yeah, maybe creative writing would be a good idea for her.
I really do like the idea of her being a writer and wanting to go into writing. I like the idea of it something that connected to her mom. So um, she wanted to go into writing because it was something that she did with her mom. Her mom encouraged her to do that, and after her parents died, she sort of loses her motivation to pursue this major. But she's already like a year in on her second year, so she can't really back out. She feels like she can't back out at this point. So there's that
Mm.
conflict. There's that internal struggle of like, not knowing exactly what she's doing there, but kind of pursuing it just because of that. It's that last connection to her parents. So
Hmm.
I do like the idea of that being sort of a source of angst for her.
Yeah, but so from what I understand with the way like a bachelor degree works in the US, because here in Australia most bachelor degrees are 3 years. So, but in the US it's four, and I think that's because in the first year you can be undecided. Like you can,
I think that is a thing, like undeclared major. Yeah.
yeah. So I guess it would be possible for Elena to have not decided yet, or like it might be even be a bit twisty if she was twisty. Um, like it might be a bit interesting if she was trying to choose between medicine and writing, and then had lost her parents, like, and kind of felt like she couldn't. Like she was in the process of picking because I think her mum was her mum ever a writer, or was she just like super encouraging her to write? I forget which it was. We could look it up on the wiki. Let me have a look. What was her mum's name? I don't remember.
Okay. But I do remember that her mentioning that she used to write together with her mother. So I don't remember if her mother was a writer,
Mm.
like as a profession, but I remember that was something that the two of them used to do together.
So I think either way, even if her name was Miranda, I think even if Miranda wasn't alright, I'm still like going through and trying to find. You have to on the
Hmm.
wiki you have to expand the family members section because it's so long for Elena. Holy shit.
It's long and convoluted. Yeah.
We can't kill Jenna, by the way, just because the summers reminded
No, we
me.
can't. Absolutely not.
I don't think it's saying she was a member
Yeah.
of the town council. Yeah, it's not really telling me. So, anyway, so I think it could be interesting if Elena is a bit undecided and then feels like she can't do either of the things that she was considering. Like even if she was leaning towards creative writing, like she's now had this big like medical experience, losing her
Hmm.
parents and then being in hospital after the car accident and that sort of thing. Like it would make sense for her to be a bit conflicted and feel like she can't do anything. Uh, but I do think creative writing eventually, even if she hasn't decided that when it starts, I think the creative writing is probably the better move for her.
Yeah,
Can
that sounds
Jeremy?
good.
How old is Jeremy compared to Elena?
Jeremy's 15 at the start of the show, and I think Elena is 17. Yeah.
Okay, so there's like a
So
2 year
a two
gap.
year
So
difference.
Jeremy wouldn't
Yeah.
have started yet. I think he'd be in his senior year of high school. But obviously, with him struggling in that period, it might make sense to kind of explore the idea that maybe he won't go and maybe he'll do art later or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think that Jeremy would be too invested in the idea of going to college, where we see him in the beginning of the show. So I think the idea of him
Yeah.
just barely making it out of
Mm.
high school and not really thinking
Yeah.
about college really makes sense for him.
Okay, and what about Bonnie? What does she study in the show when they eventually go to uni? Uni, when they eventually go to college.
Um, I don't know. I would have to check the wiki for that. Uh,
Whatever it was not like a huge part of her
no, like
development, I don't think. Like,
as like nothing is usually with Bonnie. They don't really give her much to
yep,
do, so I don't think it was that important.
just ducking all of these ads on the wiki.
There was a comment on the wiki that asked, "Was it ever revealed what Bonnie decided to study in college?" And the commenter said she was undecided, but I think that just means that they didn't really establish that. So
Hmm.
I think we can choose whatever for Bonnie because there's no precedent in the show.
Okay, cool. What do you think for Bonnie?
I think it'd be cool if she got into history,
Mm-hmm.
just this idea that Bonnie doesn't really have much of a connection to the town like the other Mystic Falls families do for a lot of reasons, some of them having to do with the fact that the show is set in the American South and a lot of what happens during like the American Civil War. But I like the idea of Bonnie sort of pursuing a connection with the town and her family through studying local history. So I think it'd be cool if
Hmm.
she were a history major. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that her family does have connections, but it's presented quite vaguely because, for example, I'm pretty sure one of her ancestors was in the town back when it was like when for some reason the Michelson family was there. I think one of her ancestors was there. Or am I remembering this incorrectly?
Yeah, there's definitely yeah. There's definitely some connection, but it's very tenuous.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like, it's just always that there's a Bennett witch when there needs to be some kind of spell. Like, it's not really
Yeah.
that she gets to wear the gowns and go to the Founders Day stuff. Like, it's not, it's never that Bonnie, as a black woman, her family are founders of the town because that's, I would say there's a double whammy here where historically it would have, may have been unlikely for, given when the town was founded, unlikely for them to invite a black family onto the board, but also because I just think the
hmm
narrative really ignores her and doesn't give her a chance to be involved in the big events. Like she's always doing some kind of spell to help somebody out. Like it really is like there's a connection, but it's not very well considered. And I think her researching the history of the town and stuff like
hmm
that would work
Yeah.
a lot better to kind of even just ask the question, even if we don't change the specific circumstances, which I suspect we might, but even to just ask the question of like, is there really, is that all that there is it really just, well, this one ancestor did this spell and then Emily did this spell and then there's me doing spells, like,
hmm Definitely. Yeah.
and I also want her to kind of have fun with it, like a little bit, but yeah, it would be cool um to do that. What about Matt?
Oh, Matt, poor guy. I think that if we're doing it for second year, we should probably decide. But I think that he would at least take the most time to declare his major. So, because he's kind of, I don't know, he's just kind of lost. He's just kind of there. They don't do a lot with him um, either on the show. So I like the idea of him being undeclared, but being on a football scholarship because football, apparently, that's a big deal in American colleges. And to sort of
Mm,
create a contrast, Vicky is working. So while Matt actually went to college, Vicky is kind of the one who has to support the household because she's
mm-hmm,
working full time, whereas Matt is just working part time, probably to support himself in college as well. So, what do you think? Do you have
mm.
any specific ideas on Matt?
I think that it's interesting to like because I don't imagine that either of Matt's parents would have gone to college, and I am not interested in like treating college as this thing that everybody has to do. But I think it's important to acknowledge that at this point in American history, it was very much like the idea of going to college and of having that opportunity. Like it was seen as, you know, improving your job prospects, proving that you're serious, and people who didn't go to college are lesser in some way. And so it's not unreasonable to expect that Matt would experience a lot of pressure if he did get in on a football scholarship to feel
hmm
like he didn't really get in because he can, you know, complete a degree, or to feel pressure to do really well because Vicky is, let's say, working to support the household and that kind of thing. Like, I think it's cool to play Matt and Vicky off of one another in that sense, where there's like some real parentification going on because their parents aren't around enough, and so they're kind of like looking after one another in this sort of dysfunctional household that's like extremely difficult. So yeah, I think that his major. I mean, to be honest, I really can't imagine Matt picking a major. Maybe it's because he didn't get enough of a personality the first time around, but it's I'm really struggling with the idea of what he would actually do. Maybe him being in a similar boat to Elena would be an interesting twist of like irony.
So, like choosing between two majors. Do you have any two majors, like as an idea? Because I honestly can't. I can't think of much for him. I don't know, something boring like economics, something like stable, something.
Yeah, well, Tyler's probably doing something boring like law because his dad wants him to do it. So maybe Matt is like considering doing that, doing something similar, or yeah, it would just be a lot of pressure on him. I think. To be honest, my answer is I want him to drop out. Like, if it sucks, hit the bricks, just quit. Like, just go, like, do what you actually want to do. But obviously, that's just not how society is set up to function for him. Like, what are his opportunities going to be?
Mhm.
What is he going to do with his life? Um, you know, it's a difficult question to answer. It's making me feel sad. I think we could probably circle back once we figured out more of his arc. I think, who do we have left? So we've done Stefan. We've decided Damon definitely doesn't need one. We've done
I
Jeremy,
think that it'd be
Elena.
cool if Damon were like a teacher or a faculty member at college because that kind of gives him a reason to keep an eye on
Yeah,
Stefan. And I think that, I don't know, just Damon being a theater kid and uh, trying to wrangle a bunch of young actors who are trying to learn the ropes is kind of interesting to me. But that would
yeah,
kind of involve a bigger change that Damon should be less of a piece of shit. But we can
yeah.
talk more about that later on.
Definitely. I think we probably both have ideas about that, about him being less of a piece of shit. It's like a pretty big change. I think Caroline is
Yeah.
the one that we haven't quite caught yet. What do you think for Caroline?
Just because that Caroline loves to investigate and get up all into people's business. I like the idea of her being a journalist and getting into journalism. So we see that a little bit of that detective work early on, and I think that, and she kind of goes on to become like a television personality uh, in later seasons. So I think it'd be cool for her to pursue journalism. What about you?
No, I agree. I think that it could be cool if, let's say that there's something that they all want to look into. I feel like Elena and Caroline and Bonnie's may just play into one another kind of well. Like if Elena is looking at creative writing, then there would be some crossover with journalism, most likely. Um, at least
Mhm.
that's how I've experienced it in my media and communications degree, but that may be different in the US. But it would just be like a cool way for them to be investigating things together. I think it would make a cool like little squad out of them, like rounds out the team. So that would be cool.
Yeah, definitely. So, what did we cover so far? We talked about uh, ramping up the vampire lore, keeping the 2000s nostalgia and that whole sort of vibe. Everyone is in college. The humanity switch has to go. More representation across the board. And we need to fix Damon.
Yes, we need to fix Damon. God, maybe that can be our next like. I don't know if we can do a whole episode just on Damon. I think I might go a little bit crazy prepping for a whole episode just on Damon.
Yeah, I don't think he deserves a full episode, actually.
Not yet, not yet. I think we can fix him or potentially make him worse, but not yet. But so maybe next our next meeting we can do Damon, Stefan, and Elena, I guess, because everything else sort of flows on from that dynamic, right?
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so I'll prep my notes for that. You can prep your notes for that. And if anybody eavesdropping wants to uh, bring forth any suggestions, we can take suggestions for the show at contact@revamppodcast.com. So, and we'll leave that information in the notes below, from the meeting notes below this recording, just in case anybody needs that. So,
All right.
nice hanging out with you, Ingrid.
You too. See you next week, Flo.